I spent some days away at the end of 2022, almost 2 weeks, and although I had all the intentions to create while I was away, maybe do a bit of drawing or something low stakes, I didn't. So when I got back, I had that rusty feeling you get when you stop a habit for a few weeks. And so my goal was to dive back in, and I didn't want to ease in or build up slowly. I wanted to literally go full force into painting every day, which is a habit that I spent most of last year building up. So I thought, what better way to do this than set myself a challenge to fill a sketchbook in a week. Obviously the choice of sketchbook is key here. I didn't want to do a 100-page sketchbook, so I chose this accordion sketchbook that was just the perfect size. It has 10 different pages and you can fill the back too, but my goal was just to do one side for this week. I'll link the exact sketchbook below. Another key part of this challenge for myself was that I wasn't going to plan any of the illustrations or paintings because I really wanted to just create. So I wouldn't recommend this in general. I think planning is a key part of creating, but for my goal of jumping back in, I really just wanted to have fun and enjoy the process and flow with it. This meant that I had Pinterest open and I just scrolled and searched different images that would come to mind that I felt like painting, and the only truly planned illustration was the very last one that I did, which I'll get into a bit later. So I started with a monochromatic portrait, which is one of my favourite things to paint. I actually have a video on monochromatic portraits and why I love painting them. I felt very rusty for this one and I kept going over and over the portrait, which I think resulted in it being a bit too blended. You'll see the difference with the portraits later on where I got the hang of it a bit more. I love painting fruit, and I've said that a few times already. I really love bright colours and I love the variation that you get with all the highlights, so I painted this pomegranate and I wanted to do the inside and outside of it. I love exploring texture with paint, and I also had a little bit of space on the page where I thought painting the seeds would be perfect, and by the end of this illustration I felt like I was coming back into my stride. By the way, I think I forgot to mention at the beginning, but I'm using gouache for all these illustrations, and I actually used a mixture of 3 different brands, which I'll link in the description. On the second day, I really felt like painting a plant, so I just did a quick search and started painting when I found an image that called me. One thing I'm finding that as I grow in my art practice, I'm getting less reliant on finding the most perfect reference image, especially with certain subjects, so not all of them, but certain ones I do feel more confident in my ability to be able to make my painting or illustration get a life of its own through my own choice of colours and brushstrokes and lighting. So even though having a good image to paint from is great, I also love that I don't have to depend on copying the image super accurately. Like, I still definitely rely on references, but I love that I don't feel so stuck to them, and this has definitely come with a lot of practice. In my next illustration, I really wanted to paint a coffee pot, and I grew up with one of these permanently on the stovetop, and I also wanted to capture this little espresso cup that my grandma gave me, as I had been thinking of her a lot this day. But the espresso cup was just not working out at all, and I ended up painting over it, which is really the great thing about using gouache. I wanted to paint another portrait, and I found a reference photo on Pinterest where there was this bright contrast with a sunbeam hitting the girl's face, and I love how it looked. The painting wasn't super accurate to the reference image, like she ended up actually looking completely different to what the photo looked like. But I was satisfied with it because she still looked accurate anatomically, which is really important to me when I'm painting these portraits. Because I loved the lighting so much in this portrait, I looked for a similar photo with the sunlight hitting the face of another person, and I found a really great reference picture on Pinterest, and I loved how this portrait turned out. I really loved how I felt painting it. I felt really confident in my brushstrokes and very decisive, like I knew how to accurately lay down the paint without having to overwork it, and I really want to keep making portraits like this one. I felt like I was on a really great streak by this point, and images of things I wanted to paint kept coming into my mind. I had been really wanting to paint pigeons for a while, and I found this really cute photo. I whizzed through this illustration. I had a similar feeling with my brushstrokes and colour selection. I think this feeling of confidence that was returning in me was what I was enjoying the most during painting these illustrations. I ended that day starting on a really tiny Studio Ghibli scene study, and I decided to finish it off the next day. And then the next day came, and oh my god, I hit a whole wall on this day. I was really not in the mood to paint, and normally my advice to myself is don't paint. Like, if you don't feel like painting, rarely does pushing myself to paint actually help me. I know this may not be the advice you hear out there, but there is really a difference between like feeling a bit lazy and having to motivate yourself to set up your paints and paper and all of that, versus really not feeling in the mood to paint at all. But I pushed on because I really wanted to do this challenge and show up for myself in this way. So after completing the Studio Ghibli scene and then feeling pretty satisfied with it, I picked this photo I had taken of the sky, and I thought it was pretty low stakes because it was quite simple. But I had a really hard time with it, and I hated the process so much. Like, I just couldn't blend the clouds. I felt like it looked so random and it wasn't my style at all. And I think this was down to just me not being in the mood to paint, and so I don't know if my mood influenced the outcome, but anyway, I really wanted to rip out this illustration, but obviously I couldn't without breaking the whole sketchbook. I was really upset with it just because I felt like I had ruined my sketchbook completely, which is so ridiculous and defeats the whole point of doing something like this. But it made me really confront my perfectionist tendencies and this need for everything to be held to this really high standard, especially when working within a sketchbook, which is exactly what sketchbooks are for. I think the clouds are the only painting that I did that day, and I was feeling so low about my art, which is really ridiculous, I know. I'm just being honest about how the feelings really can ebb and flow when you're creating. I did get over myself and I moved on the next day. I love colours so much. I'm constantly thinking about how I can be more limited in my colour palette, but the reality is that I just want to use all the colours at the same time. So I found a super colourful photo of a bird and I had so much fun painting it. I then went back to this little gap on one of the pages and I painted a slice of orange. And this process was really interesting for me because I approached it like I normally do with my fruit studies, like trying to get all the variations of the colour and the light and the juiciness of it. But once I finished it, I decided it really called for a different style. So I covered it with more opaque brushstrokes and made it a bit more like pop art, with cleaner lines and not as realistic, and I loved the results. I really liked the overall flatness of this illustration. I felt like I was experimenting, which is kind of what you want to do in a sketchbook. For the final portrait, I went with Joaquin Phoenix as the Joker, and picking a well-known face is always going to take me longer because I get quite stuck in making it as accurate as possible, because you can immediately tell if the likeness is off when painting a well-known face. I don't think overall it looked that much like him, but I didn't dislike the end result, and I did it pretty quickly. I think it was about an hour and a half to complete this one in total. And I think by this point I had really let go of my perfectionism, and I was just kind of going with the creative flow and learning and moving on. Okay, we've almost finished. For this final illustration, I thought of the concept of making a heart out of chili peppers because I'm designing some different prints and stickers and things for my shop. So I spent some time finding some chili peppers online, isolating the images and positioning them in a heart shape, and I used Procreate to do this. And I really loved this illustration. I did it really quickly, and I think this is because I was really back to that feeling of confidence, letting go of the perfectionism. And I had been playing with paint for a week, so I felt very familiar with how the paint behaves, if that makes sense. So I felt like my brushstrokes were loose but very precise, and I was able to create these really accurate chilies with a few brushstrokes. Look out for this illustration on some bits that will be released really soon in my Etsy shop if they haven't already been released. I'll link it down below. Overall, I took about 9-ish days to fill the sketchbook, so just over a week, but it was such a brilliant experience for me to let go of my perfectionist tendencies, to jump back into painting and getting comfortable with paint super quickly after taking a 2-week break. And my main 2 takeaways were to be less precious with my sketchbooks, experiment, don't strive to make every page beautiful, and secondly, that following my creative desires of what I want to paint can get me into a really great flow and build my confidence really quickly because I'm enjoying the process so much. Oh, and planning doesn't always have to happen, especially if I've gone through a long stint of not painting and I want to restart quickly. I hope that was useful for you to see, and if you made it all the way to the end, let me know, and I will see you in my next video.